Let's stay with this story and speak to Moepeng Talane, who's the Corruption Watch's senior journalist. Thank you so much for your time. The fifth installment, a lot of people are waiting for it, but the delays are making quite a number of people upset. Even some are saying that the Commission is now in contempt of court. Lots of upset, South Africans who are waiting to see this report. I wonder, what are your reactions?
Certainly, I mean, for every delay in the process, the public seems to understand it to mean that there'll be a delay in action being taken against those who may eventually be found guilty. So yes, there is a bit of anxiety, but we'll wait to hear from the Commission what the explanation is for the latest delay on Wednesday.
And it's going to be interesting to see. But, when we take a step back and go back to the first report, for example, in the first installment, we saw SARS, also coming out, a lot of evidence there, among other, key role players that we saw at SA and all of that. But staying with SARS, fingers were pointing at former President Jacob Zuma, for example, and former SARS Commissioner Tom Moyane, as, saying that they've played a significant role in getting that institution where it is now. I mean, it went as far as saying the evidence is a clear example of how private sector colluded with the executive, including former President Jacob Zuma, to capture an institution that was highly regarded internationally and render it ineffective. Do you think by now the NPA should have acted when it comes to SARS?
Absolutely. I think the issue of the NPA does not only apply to SARS, of course, but to point to your focus there. Absolutely. SARS had one of the most incredible witnesses in the form of Mr. Athol Williams, who was the whistleblower with regard to Bain and Company, and he was the one who really gave us the biggest chunk of evidence that had to do with how that company did business with SARS, and how it may have been how SARS may have been captured by those in power within Bain. And for that reason, I think there was enough for the NPA to follow up on in that regard, and that there could have been action taken by now. I do think that the lack of communication from the NPA is a bit of a challenge, I think, for members of the public as well. It would have been great for us to be getting a sense of where the NPA is with some of the cases, of course, keeping the sensitive information to themselves, but whatever it is that can be shared with the members of the public should have been, I think, shared by now, so that we get a sense of whether or not there is progress on that front.
At the same time, even the case against, SAA board chairperson, for example, Dudumieni, as well as Yake Kwinana, who chaired SAA Technical, a lot of viewers are waiting.
True, indeed we are. We are indeed waiting to hear what is likely to happen. I mean, there was a sense during the public hearings, the Chief Justice made a comment particularly during Ms. Kwinana's evidence, that what he's picking up from how she perhaps did, or rather how she undertook her role within SAA and SAAT, is that there needs to be a strong a relook of how board members of state-owned entities are appointed, how they are monitored, how they are evaluated, so that we always get the best of the best in those positions, and that we're not at any given time looking at people who have people appointed who may compromise the growth and stability of such SOEs. So yes, the delay in us knowing what is likely to happen to individuals such as Yake Kwinana and Dudumieni is a bit worrying, but we can only hope that once the president tables his action plan in Parliament, that it will get a sense of where the big names are likely to go.
And talking about big names, I mean, in another part of the report, for example, we see what, the Commission puts on the doorstep of former Public Enterprises Ministers Malusi Gigaba as well as Lynn Brown, and the role that they are said to have played in allowing the Gupta brothers to be able to get their way in.
Certainly. I mean, these are people who held very influential, very powerful positions in public office. And if not to use the report of the Commission to set an example for the kinds of ministers that we should have in the future, members of the executive that we should, the caliber of members of the executive that we should have in the future. I don't know that if the action plan, that action program that's going to be introduced by the president does not address that particular issue. I don't think that the Commission would have been useful for that particular to that particular extent. So it really is a matter of changing the way we've been doing things, both in government and in the private sector as well. The pressures should be on, but we don't know if it is indeed on. We don't know that behind the scenes there is action being taken against people who influence these decisions that were taken that led to state capture. And
I suppose also, you talk about action. There's also going to be important when it comes to Cader deployment, because this also came out, from the report itself, looking at the fact that there needs to be a change in terms of how some of these individuals are appointed when it comes to Cader deployment, and things need to be done differently. And I'm sure you'd remember one of even, the president when he went to the Commission, and various other ANC leaders who were saying that the ANC is basically on trial here and it needs to do things differently.
Absolutely. One of the things we've always advocated for as Corruption Watch was that positions of such influence as, heads of Chapter 9 institutions and several other government institutions should be held in a public forum, so that people get to see all the candidates, members of the public get a sense of the quality of the candidates that will be put through interviews and things like that. So I don't see how Cader deployment cannot be reversed to the extent that the same cannot be extended to when we appoint heads of state-owned entities. The writings on the wall, there needs to be a change in how those appointments are done, because it clearly shows what has been revealed through the Commission or through its public hearings, is that there is a weakness in how these appointments are the transparency element is not catered for in how they're appointed. There is no monitoring of whether or not these people are indeed they are relevant and they are fit for office and things like that. So those are the issues that really need to be taken into consideration when you're looking at changing how you want to constitute these state-owned enterprises.
And, one also looks at the fact that all of these reports are coming out and they point towards the Gupta brothers and the influence that they're said to have exercised. At the same time, there's still this process of trying to extradite them back to South Africa. It's going to be critical now more than ever for this process in order to succeed, so that lots of questions can be answered, and to see whether or not, in fact, the NPA does have a strong, indictment against them. Absolutely, and even in the picture that you paint now, there needs to be fairness in how that process is carried out.
Yes, they may be implicated, grossly implicated in state capture within the country, but there needs to be fairness in the process of bringing them into the country, so that they, all the loopholes are closed, and that we don't sit with egg on our faces as a country and say, we could have done things differently in retrospect. So there needs to be that understanding that it might take time, but there needs to be fairness in how those processes are followed. Indeed, we can only hope that everybody who is important and relevant to that process is indeed working hard to make sure that it happens, because we would want to have everybody who was implicated to have a fair chance of defending themselves through a judicial process, and to have a fair trials, fair criminal processes instituted against them.
And that's going to be key, because that forms part of the extradition process, because if the UAE seems like there's a witch hunt, they may just rescind. So there's going to have to be quite a lot at play here, and even looking at what happens then with that Bosasa evidence, as we also saw Gavin Watson passing away even before taking the stand. But thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That was Moepeng Talane, Corruption Watch's senior journalist.